versatility, her skill at seeming at ease in any surroundings. Her ability to display emotion melodramatically or with tender restraint, as in the famous homecoming scene in The Birth of a Nation, led Mr. Griffith to assign to Miss Marsh his plum dramatic role. After the birth came intolerance, with her tender and expressive performance as the young wife and mother whose husband is on trial for murder. Playing the judge was Lloyd Ingraham, who that same year directed Miss Marsh in her own first starring vehicle, The History of the Motion Picture. A series in which we follow the growth of a new art, its earliest beginnings, the first concept of projection, the development of story and spectacle, and the great stars. All a part of the history of the motion picture. The County Orphanage. Its loneliest inmate, Hoodoo Ann, played by May Marsh. Ann's hoodoo started the day she arrived at the orphanage on Friday the 13th, and nothing has gone right for her since. A more pampered inmate is Goldie, who has no chores and her choice of dolls. In orphanage films, from Mary Pickford through Shirley Temple, the heroine's rival was usually gawky as well as mean. But not here, with Goldie played by winsome, blonde Mildred Harris, later the first Mrs. Charles Chaplin. Callously, Goldie abandons one of the dolls and goes to play. Anne, who has never had a doll, finds it. Broken, her hoodoo at work again. She had only wanted to play with it, but now she can't return it. Hardened by years of loneliness, and realizing the superintendent wouldn't believe her anyway, She is determined to admit nothing and brazen it through. Near the orphanage lives young Jimmy Vance, would-be artist, played by Bobby Harron, favorite leading man of Griffith until his discovery of Richard Barthelmess. Also living in the same town are Mr. and Mrs. Knapp, lonely ever since the loss of their only child. Next door to the Knapps are the quarreling Higginses and their cat. Jimmy's father is anxious that he give up this art foolishness and go out and get a job. Ann does have one friend at the orphanage, Cindy. In the pantry, one of the boy orphans helps himself to some of the wooden matches. Reading Ann's palm, Cindy predicts that there'll be no breaking of the hoodoo until Ann is married. The borrowed matches have wound up in the boys' dormitory. And fall to the floor. Inevitably, where the matches fell is just where the matron steps. Assigning May to roles like this one, combining tomboyishness with moments of pathos, the studio was grooming May to follow in Mary Pickford's footsteps. Out for evening drives are the Vances and the Knapps. And it's the Vances who first see the fire already out of control. Goldie is missing. These night scenes were, of course, shot in the daytime, and blue-toned stock achieved the night effect. Today, filters are used to darken the scene. As usual, Goldie gets all the attention. But the Knapps are quick to appreciate Ann's heroism. Amid roaring flames and collapsing timber, boy meets girl. The orphans are temporarily homeless, so the Knapps take Ann with them, and her big adventure begins. She even gets to ride in an automobile. For the first time in her life, Anne enjoys kindness and affection. In early 1916, D.W. Griffith was actively preparing his masterwork, Intolerance, as well as running the Fine Arts Studio and supervising some 50 productions with Lillian Gish, Douglas Fairbanks, and other stars. But he still found time to write the story of Hoodoo Ann under his pseudonym of Granville Warwick and to personally supervise its production. The Knapps are becoming increasingly fond of Anne and hope that the temporary adoption can become legal and permanent. And Anne, remembering Cindy's prophecy, is hoping that Jimmy will be the husband who might break her hoodoo. For 2 happy years, there's no sign of the hoodoo, and Anne tries on her first grown-up dress for her first date with her first beau. Having May Marsh show she's grown up was one of Griffith's favorite bits of business. He had her do the same thing well into the 20s in The White Rose. And how did sophisticated teenagers of 1916 plan their future? They studied furniture and fashion in vogue, of course. And then, the treat to top them all, a visit to the town's little movie house. What they're about to see is a spoof of the early westerns made in New Jersey. The Triangle Company, which made Hoodoo Ann, had William S. Hart under contract now and made the industry's best Western westerns, so they could well afford this genial jibe at the Eastern Western. Already, westerns had collected so many cliches that both audiences and producers were able to laugh at them. Yet, even now, 50 years later, they are still as popular as ever. Done, of course, a little more seriously than this parody. The hero is a veteran Griffith player, Carl Stockdale, presumably used here because of a slight resemblance to Hart. The villain at the window shoots his gun into the air, and Carl clutches his chest. Producer Griffith may have been kidding the Western tradition here, but he respected it too. The same year that he made this film, he also produced The Fall of the Alamo, the first movie spectacular about Sam Houston and Davy Crockett. Director Lloyd Ingraham remained associated with the Western in a far more reverent capacity also. One of his biggest hits of the late 20s was the Fred Thompson epic Jesse James. While in the talkie era, giving up direction in favor of his first love, acting, Ingraham was a prominent character player in scores of Westerns throughout the 30s and 40s. Back home, Anne is rummaging in the attic and finds an old revolver. And like young movie fans of all eras, she likes to play at being an actress. Like many early film players, May Marsh came from a film family. Her sister, Marguerite, was a popular leading lady, and her brother, Oliver Marsh, was one of the leading cameramen of his day. Next door, the battling Higginses are at it again. Mrs. Higgins' ominous threat is overheard by the passerby. Anne's acting in her monodrama becomes intense. The gun fires, and Mr. Higgins falls. Couldn't have done any harm. Her worst fears confirmed. Her hoodoo has reappeared. And, as the original title put it, has grown into the dignity of tragic fate. But if the hoodoo has returned, so has the survival instinct that Anne learned so well at the orphanage. Mrs. Higgins misses her husband, but not very much, of course. And Anne is more and more concerned. Why hasn't the body been discovered? The room is empty. No sign of a body. And then, a discovery that changes her confusion to abject terror. A blood stain on the step. Why, of course, it must have happened just as in the movie. Mr. Higgins must have crawled away and died, alone. Too frightened to know what else to do, she tries to erase that blood trail. Odd actions, which naturally attract the interest of the detective on the prowl for clues to Higgins' disappearance. Jimmy's arrival brightens Anne's gloom for a moment. His career as an artist is finally launched. Note that Jimmy's address is Riverside, New York, although all the exteriors so far have clearly been California. In 1916, Hollywood was still such a rural community that to make story locales seem more important, they were identified as being on the East Coast. Anne's joy is short-lived. How can she, a murderess, ever marry Jimmy? Jimmy doesn't understand why she is throwing away this chance at happiness, and Anne can't explain. As a result, Jimmy is convinced that she's been merely amusing herself with him. The detectives report to Mrs. Higgins no results in the search for her husband. Incidentally, one of the detectives is Elmo Lincoln, soon to achieve fame as the movie's first Tarzan, the one coming down the steps first. Detective Lincoln spots the telltale bloodstain. What was reported as a disappearance might be a murder. Anne is torn by a struggle of conscience. Should she let Mrs. Higgins take the blame for a crime she may have committed herself? There is only one decent thing to do. And then, the corpse walks in. A ghost? No. The grief-stricken widow has her sparring partner back again. Pa Higgins hadn't been shot. He had fainted, took off to recuperate in the fresh air, and had gone to sleep in a haystack. And all the complications are satisfactorily, if not too logically, removed, just in time for a typical Cinderella ending. Because she had been teamed so much with Bobby Harron on the screen, and seen frequently with him off-screen, and had been absent from the screen for several months before Hoodoo Ann, rumors naturally started around Hollywood that they had been secretly married. Actually, they had not. And the next year, May Marsh married her one and only real-life husband, the California banker, Louis Lee Arms. Ahead for May Marsh lay years of stardom. In the 20s, usually as the innocent girl victim of unscrupulous heavies. This is The Rat, made in Europe. Miss Marsh also turned in many fine performances in the talkies, especially under director John Ford, well into the 1960s.